At least we know that now.
Yes, yes.
All right. I'm sorry, everybody. Okay, so yeah, we're good. We're good. We'll start now. Okay. So sorry, everybody. I'm back now, and I think we're all good with the technical difficulties. So thank you for like enduring with us. I'm sorry, I didn't know that Safari was trash, um, and so we're on Google Chrome now. So thanks to Google Chrome, I guess. But so anyway, so we'll start over from the beginning. My name is Rashad, and I'm a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Our party is a revolutionary socialist party focused on the total unification and liberation of Africa under scientific socialism. And so, obviously, you know, we organize the masses of African people on the continent. We focus on the continent heavily. Our base is in Africa, but we organize the masses of African people wherever we're at around the globe. So that means, obviously, we have chapters here in the United States of America. We got some in Europe and everywhere where we lay our head at, and we're trying to grow more, obviously. And so, you know, that's our aim, that's our goal. Um, and obviously, a part of the goal is pan-Africanism, and pan-Africanism, obviously, which we properly define as one united socialist, one united Africa under scientific socialism. So yeah, we'll just be precise with that. And so now we'll jump to land acknowledgments. And so I am out of Denver, Colorado, so-called Denver, Colorado, or occupied Ute territory. And my comrade here, Afro Phoenix, well, she could tell you where she's from. Afro Phoenix.
Make sure you're unmuted, Afro.
Well, Afro Phoenix is from occupied Tiwa territory. Also, like my friend Zach, who's been handling the tech issues with us here today. So that's good. Glad to have him here. And so, yeah, they're from occupied Tiwa territory or Albuquerque, New Mexico. Afro Phoenix, are you back?
I don't know. I'm checking.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
You are there.
Can you
good,
hear me?
good.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, actually, Afro Phoenix is actually out of, which is Albuquerque, New Mexico. I am currently in Texas, and I'm not really sure what the name of this before the Europeans stole this land. Currently, I'm
awesome.
A member of the All African People's Revolution as well.
Awesome. So yeah, you know, we like to do the land acknowledgments because we know that this is stolen land that we're on, beautiful stolen land that the tribal nation folks and that the indigenous people here have, that was unjustly stolen from them in this settler colonial state that they call United States of America. We understand what land we're on. We understand whose land we're on, and that we will give it back to them, and we will make sure that the Europeans hand it over to the indigenous people of this on Turtle Island. And so yeah, so with that, we'll start with our discussion today, which is Africom and the destruction of Libya and how Africom played a role with NATO in the destruction of Libya, and also how that relates to Somalia and the invasion and the U.S. invasions of Somalia going back all the way to 1992, and you know the relations even before then. But yeah, we'll talk about how Africom and the need to abolish it and how it relates to those to Libya and to Somalia. So we'll start with Afro Phoenix.
Well, what I learned is that Africom, it means what, and we call it the United States Africa Command, and that's what the acronym AFRICOM is, one of the 11 of defenses combatant commands with a geographical mission that provides command and control of military forces in Africa. So Africom is responsible for all U.S. Department of Defense operations and security operations on the African continent, its island nation waters, and the largest largest number of them are in, and I will enumerate 7 of them: Cape Verde, Comoros, Sao Tome, Principes, Sayas. So those are just some of the countries that, besides the continent states, is controlling. Back to you.
Yeah, and so we know that Africom was created in they tried to get it going back in 2007 under George Bush, but it really took hold, and it really formed in October 1st, 2008 under Obama. And so we understand that he ended up ramping things up he ended up ramping up Africom and its expansion during his presidency. And um and so we understand that we had a black face in the White House, and he expanded the U.S. military occupation of the continent of Africa. Um, and the initial thoughts behind AFRICOM were to supposedly combat terrorism, but we understand that the U.S. usually puts on a front for what they really want to do. They have the front facing message, which is to combat terrorism, and they create a lot of hoopla around that. But we understand that when they go in, that the real reason for these invasions and the undertakings in the African continent and elsewhere around the world, it's never to do what they say, especially not to combat terrorism or to bring humanitarian aid or bring democracy to whatever nation that they supposedly are trying to help. That it's usually about the extraction of resources and the military occupation of these places. So yeah, Afro-Phoenix, did you have anything to add on to that about the creation of AFRICOM and why it's their stated purpose of fighting
Right.
terror?
Yes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read a bit from Jamu Umi's Defense Against White Supremacists, Patriarchal and Fascist Violence on page 19. And so the current state of Africa within the U.S. Africa today can be summarized as a continent dominated by foreign interests, which is, of course, Africa. People living in Africa today in 54 countries. There are 58 to Africa, counting the islands around the continental land base. This is about 75% of the cacao used to make chocolate products. It provides a large percentage of the world's oil for heating purposes. Most of the diamonds and gold produced today originates from Africa. Columbite, tantalite, or coltan cobalt ore that once ground down into a powder holds electrical charges. Digital technology, cellular phones, laptop computers, television, pretty much any device that sends and receives to function cannot exist without this mineral ore and its plentiful supplies in Central and Southern Africa. Valuable that it can sell for almost $600 per African bauxite, uranium, zinc, flowers, and other supply most of what is used on the world's market in the production of automobiles, passive, aluminum products, and much, much more. So as you can see, this is where most of everything is coming out of the 2 United States and the other countries that have the interest, of course. So part of the story, and that's why they're so involved. And with the everything is coming out of Africa, and the world could not survive the resources that are stolen out of Africa from the African people. We're all African people, no matter where we are. If we're of African descent, back to you, Rashad.
Yeah, most definitely. So yeah, like as Afro Phoenix was illustrating, I know it's a little choppy, but as she was illustrating, the we all understand the guys. We all understand the real reasons that they enter these places, especially on the African continent, and it's extraction of resources, and to occupy them militarily so that these nations can't escape from the economic exploitation of Africa and the mineral resource extraction of Africa. They can't respond if if the United States and other nations that they're allied with are armed to the fist on the continent, on the ground, against the people. And so they understand that, and so they use the economic might, and they back it up with the military might, or vice versa. They'll use the military might to reinforce and to pave the way for the economic development, the economic extraction that they need and that they want from these places, especially on the African continent, because we understand, as again, as Afro Phoenix was illustrating, all the resources that are integral into Western society, into America, into Europe. The things that go into our computers, that go into our planes, our electric cars, so many of the resources that are necessary for daily life and obviously for luxury as well are coming straight from Africa.
These countries themselves, they don't even get to to reap the benefits of their material resources they have. It's just extracted out of the continent.
Exactly.
How are they gonna how can they develop their own country if they can't reap those resources? Like no one's eating the bauxite, and
And that also relates to the military expansion and stuff like that. When Africom goes into these nations and they decide to partner, which is to me is kind of like a hostage situation, even though we know that neo-colonialism is rampant and that governments are and presidents are willy-nilly with their with their relations with the United States and imperialism. However, we understand that when Africom forces its way onto the continent and into these countries, that and they partner with these with these nations' military, that they end up spending money on bullets and weapons, and people can't eat weapons. People can't eat bullets. People can die from them though. And so we understand that when they, that's what production is ended up ramping to fight terrorism and to formulate a national security presence with the help of the United States and the imperialism and other Western nations.
And that military training itself leads to further increase in the so-called terrorism that is somehow magically imported onto the African continent, but it's not. It's because, we have these neo-colonial faces, these black faces, these Africans who are against their own people, that receive training from from U.S. military occupation. Like you said, the budget goes to either their personal wealth or more training, but also, that wealth, their increased training, it doesn't go to the people. It doesn't train the people to fight back or anything. No, it's like further starvation of resources, further starvation of technical training, because it's not just armed training. They receive technical training, different things, but that's denied from the people that they're serving. So it all develops even more of more reason for people to go into more violent, terroristic actions. U.S. creates that terrorism.
I would like to add also is that this is a Jamu Umi, is that what's essential to know this is the vast toll extracting these resources on Africa from the standpoint of the tremendous amount of wealth without stopping to benefit everyday Africans. overwhelming the work takes on on our peoples and environmental consequences from these exploitative processes. And so this is also tied to that is very, very, very important to all on the planet. Climate emergency, and it's just being totally focusing on stealing, and we've got all these other problems. And to highlight is the exiting of the people fleeing for their lives because they're being torn apart, devastated by Africom to countries that are benefiting from Africa. And so the African people that are fleeing for their lives, and then they stop them at the borders and they can't come in. And this is happening all over the world, in Europe, in the United States, and other places as well. As you, Zach, about these other countries, and what you mention is Brazil, and so this is something that realizes that Brazil is mainly African people that before coming to APRP, and so I think is his name. They're just destroying the world's on, and we're all dependent. We're all dependent on the air, and most of the medicine on the out of the Amazon. So again, this is the word.
Yeah, most definitely. And so so ultimately this leads us to like the part of Africom that people like to not that they might not relay that they had a hand in, which is the destruction of the overthrow and the murder of Muammar Gaddafi. And so and that's the need for America and Western and U.S. imperialism to create the need to create their own need in these countries. And when I say that, I mean they go into these places and that don't need their help, and they force them into situations where they in turn where now these nations do need their help. And so now they're creating their own, they're creating and nourishing their own existence, which and I mean the US imperialism and the US military occupations of these places. And so they create the need for US and US troops to be in these countries, especially on the continent of Africa, when they go in there and they have notions of fighting terrorism. And so in 2009, in 2011, actually, we'll start with when Gaddafi was murdered. So in October 20th of 2011, Muammar Gaddafi, the president or the leader of Libya, or the Socialist People's Republic, the Socialist Libyan People's Arab Jamahiriya. And so he was murdered on October 20th, 2011. But it really started, I mean, the US has been having a thing to pick with Gaddafi for decades. They haven't liked Gaddafi for decades because he stood against imperialism since the time he got into office and since the time he became the leader of Libya. And he constantly stood in opposition to U.S. imperialism and Western imperialism in general. And so they've despised him from the very jump. And especially with being an oil-rich country that Libya is, he nationalized the oil, and the wealth of that went to benefit the people. They had free healthcare in Libya. they had free education in Libya, something that we still don't see today in Western nations, especially not in the United States. We understand what it costs us to just exist here. And so, so yeah, they had it out for a long time, but you know, it really started to come to a head, specifically, obviously, with the creation of Africom in 2008. So we understand that Africom was created in 2008, and they were trying to search for a headquarters in Africa, and Gaddafi was one of the main proponents of this opposition to Africom's existence in general, but also to the establishment of a base in the continent of Africa, or on the continent of Africa, in whatever country it may be. He was a staunch opponent to that. And so they had troubles getting by Gaddafi because he stood as the linchpin for the continent, because they had effectively destabilized the entire continent, obviously, through years of colonialism and neo-colonialism. And so by 2008, Libya was really one of the last standing anti-imperialist nations on the continent of Africa. And, you know, Gaddafi was obviously the head of that. And so that's 2008. And so, you know, they're having troubles trying to get Africom started in Africa with the countries and stuff like that because of Gaddafi's opposition. And then comes 2009, in which China overtook the US as the leading trading partner with Africa. And that has everything to do with the destruction of Libya and with Africom's creation, because with China, now African nations don't need to be beholden, or they at least might start to feel like they don't have to be beholden to Western imperialism and the predatory loans from the IMF bank that necessitate U.S. Military intervention if things are unpaid, or if certain check markers aren't met by these African nations. They get to, you know, move in their they have provisions in these contracts where they get to move in their troops or military occupation and stuff like that. So we understand that was going on. And so China played a strategic part in the destruction of Libya, because not only, so with China, well, now you can have China as a trading partner for if you're an African nation, or you can have Libya, who was a strong trading partner for a lot of African nations. Gaddafi in the early 2000s, around 2008, 2009, was also became the president of the African Union. And he started talking about having a general currency for Africa. So now, not only does Africa have the possibility of not doing business with the U.S. or Europe or any of these imperialist nations in favor of China. Oh, well, now they don't even have to go to China; they can go to one of their own. Oh, the gold dinar. That's what it was called. That's what that's what he proposed. The Gaddafi proposed as the name for the United African Currency. And so, you know, when you start messing with these imperialists and these capitalist money, you know, the ruling class, when you start messing with their money, it's time to get you out of there, and they feel that. And so this is all happening this all coincides with the formation of Africom, and with the you know, China's overtaking of US and as a trading partner. And it also coincides with the opposition from Gaddafi to Africom. And so we understand, and so ultimately in 2011, they decided with NATO, they decided to send in the US, and Africom decided to send in, and other NATO countries decided to send in and overthrow Gaddafi and have him murdered. And so this relates to them creating the need for their own existence, because the reason Gaddafi, one of the big reasons Gaddafi was opposing Africom and having a base in Africa was because to fight terrorism, was because he felt that they had a better hold on the fight against terrorism on the continent and in their own regions than the U.S. coming from outside to enforce to enforce rules against terrorism and stuff like that, and to try to control terrorism. Yep. They had a security agency called SINSAD, which was as Libya as the head, but it also comprised other African nations. They had a security thing that they felt was dealing with terrorism on the continent in a better fashion than could the U.S. state and the U.S. security state. And so that was a big part of Gaddafi's opposition to Africom. And so they understood that, and they understood that they couldn't. That U.S. knows that they can't fight terrorism, that they're not going to end terrorism by the methods that they choose to do throughout the globe. And so by getting Gaddafi out the way, they were able to destroy Libya, to destroy the head of a coalition of nations fighting terrorism successfully, moderately successfully, better than the US could, at least. And so by getting him out the way, well, now you destabilize Libya, and then the arms that are there, they proliferate into the terrorist hands. And so there's been documented evidence that the terrorist attacks that have been carried out they've been trained in Libya. And so that stuff didn't happen before when Gaddafi was there. But after he's overthrown and things are destabilized and the terrorists are able to actually grab whatever control there is of the nation of Libya, well, then obviously what stands to happen next is that more terrorist attacks are going to happen. They reintroduce open air slave markets in Libya, which has been documented, and all of this because the U.S. decided, and NATO and Africom decided to destabilize a linchpin of African security against terrorism. And so, yeah, so ultimately they end up creating the need for their own existence, because now, well, actually the people that are trying to gain control of Libya, which are really just oil interest executives, well, yeah, now they do have an interest in trying to fight terrorism because the terrorists are the ones who have control of the country of Libya. And so, yeah, you're going to want to partner with America, or at least they're going to force you to partner with them so that you can try to rebuild your country. And so I'll stop there, but I'll allow Zach to chime in about any of that. So, but we'll stop.
Yeah, so like I'll go back to like a pretty critical like point, at least in my thinking, is the gold dinar. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. And I bring this up because Gaddafi in around like 2009, I believe, suggested bringing in Africa's own currency, the entire continent, its own currency. That's a huge deal because the transactions of their natural resources, like oil, were all done in U.S. dollar. What that means is that each transaction of natural resources has to go through like American banks, American systems, NATO controlled systems, and to be able to do that, you have to cooperate on those Western interests. What if your interests are completely opposed to NATO, to the United States? Well, if your transactions must be in the U.S. dollar, then there's no way you can't go about that. So that's why the gold dinar was a massive like initiative that could have changed the entire continent. And whenever the United States saw that was when they were like, we have to take them out. We must completely take them out, or our capitalist system, we're not able to, be little like, clip the little percentages off every transaction. And so that leads into creating a false narrative terrorism, in which the United States then invades Libya. The United States, going in there wreaking havoc, obviously creates more destruction, creates more, terrorist groups are able to go in through more. So I would say that I think the IMF and that the currency of the gold dinar is like a huge reason why. Because you have to keep in mind that anytime that there's imperialist contradictions between other countries, it's not for like moral reasons, it's for economic, material reasons. That's always the primary reason. Everything else is given as justification.
Exactly. Go ahead, Afro Phoenix.
What I wanted to add too, and as Alliance for Peace, is that the Black Alliance for Peace's International Month of Action aims to raise the public awareness about the U.S. military's existence and how the presence of U.S. forces exacerbates exacerbates violence and throughout the continent. And they're asking the International Month of Action Against attending a webinar on Africom at 13, building the popular movement for demilitarized imperialism in Africa. Organizers and activists from Africa and the diaspora will discuss Africom and what we can do to expel from the continent. Following the webinar, events will take over, organized by various organizations on the African continent in the world to demand an end to the militarization of Africa. So us out of Africa shut down Africom, and I know that we very much in alliance with this whole effort to give Africa. Another thing that I want to add as well is that the result is that Africa that is poor and very unstable because mental benefits, the forces who profit from these conditions that constantly arise in Africa can all be traced to these exploitation and the push to ensure imperialism maintains control by imperialism. We of course mean the industrial capitalist countries, Europe, etc. These entities always downplay the importance of resources and people they place in Africa to maintain the current of oppression. Tell us otherwise. The U.S. currently has almost military installations throughout Africa, and not one of them is there to build it. Instead, this military presence exists to quell and help kill colonists, to crush resistance to the rampant expressions of oppressions these industries facilitate. This military efforts cost billions taxpayers, most of whom have absolutely no idea it exists. At the Congo, imperialism has fomented instability and the country nonstop since the 1950s in order to ensure capitalism. The blatant gangsterism carried out in the process, millions of innocent lives have been brutally lost, is enacted with such national thieves that the Hollywood movies industry blatantly produces that display this horrific treatment of African people. And this is what is actually happening. And of course, most of the population in, I'm going to say, the United States, they have no idea about what is going on. Absolutely none. And so with the newscast that we get in mainstream media, does not even discuss any of this. And so people are just oblivious. People are oblivious to the horror that are taking place, while obsessed to all of these luxuries to action for communication and existence. Transportation, automobile, everything is coming out of Africa again. And so again, that's why, because it's just constantly being, resources are being stolen and the people.
Yeah, definitely. And so yeah, as that relates to Libya, the goal with the entire African continent, but obviously with Libya, was to gain control of the natural resources, because with Gaddafi you had public and national access to these resources and public and national benefits from the resources that that have to be extracted, especially oil, but all the other resources as well. And so the goal of the U.S. and the imperialist nations is in this war. They claim that they're fighting terrorism, but it's in this war, and it's domination from the IMF. And so the IMF likes to privatize the natural resources of these African nations. Obviously, with Libya, it was oil, and so that's their main goal, and that's what they want. They don't want the resources of the nation to benefit the people, which is probably the most the tenet principle in socialism is the resources of the nation benefit the people, benefit the workers, and the workers the wealth that's created by the workers. So in this case, which would be miners and stuff like that have to go into these dangerous situations to extract these resources. Even if it is oil and you have rigs and stuff like that and machinery, it's still a dangerous operation to undertake, and it's really damaging to the soil and to the earth. And so we know that places on Africa, they've been so vigorously extracted that they can't even grow stuff for the next 100, 200 years and stuff like that. There's places like that in Kenya and various other places on the continent of Africa. And so we know that the IMF, which is the economic arm of the U.S. and Western imperialism, they like to enforce these extremely extractive contracts and resource privatizations on these African nations, so that they don't benefit the people, and that the people that they do benefit are the neo-colonial agents of those countries, the petite bourgeois and the bourgeois of those nations. So the richest people in the country, the presidents, the government administrators. And so that's the small circle of everything that is benefited from the extraction, the intense extraction from these African nations. And so that is the goal of the U.S. imperialism. That was the goal in the destruction of Libya, and obviously the overthrow of Gaddafi. We also talked about the gold dinar and how important that was 2 or 3 years after Gaddafi's proposal, like Zach was talking about, for the gold dinar. He was overthrown and he was murdered violently, extremely violently. And so all of these Africom and NATO interventions on the continent serve U.S. imperialism, and they serve the U.S. Arms manufacturing apparatus. And that's basically all the U.S. is at this point, is an arms manufacturing country. And I know we've seen that on Twitter and stuff throughout, in Twitter posts and stuff like that. But it's true, at this point in time, and honestly, for the past 50, 60, 70 years, the United States has specialized in arms, and that's really their main export besides finance capital. And so unfortunately, the destruction of Libya serves as like a real blow to anti-imperialist forces. It serves as an extreme blow to grassroots efforts on the continent of Africa, and also in the United States here, because there's been points in time where Gaddafi has spoken to Africans on the continent, in the United States, and he's offered support for our revolutionary efforts here, in the term of arms and arms and weapons and funds, money. He's offered that face to face to African people more than once throughout his reign. And so the overthrow and murder of Gaddafi and the destruction of Libya has been a real blow since 2011, and we're still feeling it. And the Africans on the continent are still feeling it. The Africans who have been forced into the open air slave markets in Libya, in decimated Libya, also feel the need for also feel that void that was left by a united Libya under Gaddafi. And so
I want to bring up a point as well, because some people, especially Africans of the diaspora, You know, maybe you don't understand why you would care about what's going on in another continent if you're, you know, maybe you're not aware of like history. But to give like one concrete example of why you would care, and this will be like for United States Africans, is that part beyond just Africa's natural resources, there is another source of another massive source of income of profits that cause Africom to be a permanent structure, and that is the contract defense industry, the massive arms that that Rashad mentioned. But it's not, when we say arms, that's not just simple like, you know, rifles. No, that is like Obama started what's called the drone wars. He introduced massive use of drones. Those private contractors, they're the ones that build this. This is I forget all the names off the top of my head, but you know, this is like they build these multi-million dollar projects that build these massive drones, and they go to places like Somalia, for example, and they drone the hell out of it. Obama is the president that introduced the massive use of drones. If you Google drone wars, you will see a collection from The Intercept that goes into excruciating details of all the drone usage, and it's used in Somalia constantly. Like we're not, you know, that is a harm even if you're not in Somalia or if you're not in Africa, because you know, where's the most spending in the United States? To our military. You know, so if imperialism is being you know, fought off and weakened, it's a benefit for you as well, no matter where you are. So I'd point that out.
I'm so glad that you brought forefront, Zach, because um, in this country are totally oblivious to the fact of what horrific individual, and they lionize and um, with the mass of the public here in the United States. But he 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 did the most horrific thing, um, and being of Kenyan, absolutely, I can't even think of the word, evil, evil. Um, and what I wanted to add with that, from what would Rashawn Lord, is that the African population within the U.S. will forever for the imperialists. This is exactly the reason the system works so hard. People, they know that we are the shoot truth here for pan taking place in Africa. They know that they cannot have 50 million Africans uncontrolled while imperialism is savagely exploiting Africa. Africans and other well-meaning people misinterpret this phenomenon. Africa is so non-existent. The very real connection of Africa to Africa is easily dismissed. Most everyone in the U.S. painful ignorance about Africa. So continent doesn't seem to have any obvious relevance to their daily lives. Conclusion is most often that Africa must not be too important. As a result, the clear systemic oppression of Africans in the U.S. to this nebulous concept known as anti-blackness. And there.
Yeah, and so as you know, as we're talking about with Obama, it's you know, Obama and drone strikes. Um, that's it's funny because I mean that relates to the Somalia topic that we wanted to get into today, and that's the U.S. invasions of Somalia, and it's just U.S. has had like a thing also for Somalia for almost 20 years, a little bit longer than I've been alive, and also they've had like relations before then, before the 90s, with Somalia in various pernicious forms, we'll say. And so, but the military invasions really started in the early 90s in 92 under George Bush. But it's just interesting that Obama is the president who ended up being the one to start to escalate the situation and the military occupation of Somalia by the U.S. And so since the creation of Africom in 2008, Somalia has actually been bombed and drone airstriked every single year since then. So, that's almost 16, 20, 14, 16, almost 20 years of worth of drone strikes, and in almost 30 years worth of military occupation of Somalia just in general. But every year since 2007, the U.S. has bombed Somalia, and so also there it's purely for economic reasons and based on oil, and also a strategic position in the Horn of Africa. The U.S. has always been interested in the Horn of Africa, and really all of Europe. Europeans have been interested in the Horn of Africa for a very long time. Because of its mineral resources, as with the entire continent of Africa, as we've displayed with Libya and in other places. But the Horn of Africa is specifically strategic because of its proximity to the Middle East, in Yemen, Oman, and stuff like that is down there, adjacent across the ocean to from Somalia and Ethiopia and Eritrea and Djibouti. And so, yeah, the U.S.'s interest in there is purely strategic for oil purposes, and also for to combat Eritrea and Ethiopia, and to also coalesce them into a force that backs the U.S. completely. They want the Horn of Africa completely. They want Ethiopia, they want Eritrea, and they want Somalia and Djibouti. And so the destabilization began in 1992 with George Bush Sr., and he introduced military troops into Somalia under the name of an operation called Operation Restore Hope. And so he utilized they overthrew
Restore European hope.
Restore European hope. It had nothing to do with the African people, because literally they already had basically after helping the regime, one of the regimes in Somalia, they basically had him overthrown in the late 80s because it wasn't economically viable to have him there anymore. But also, so then it started a civil war that began to have forces in Somalia fighting against each other, fighting for control of the country, and fighting to get their country back in control of the Somali people, which was very important. And so famines, they had droughts and stuff like that, which are obviously not man-made, but they had droughts that caused famines, and a lot of people died in the early 90s. And so this began the guise of how George Bush Sr. wanted to infiltrate Somalia. He used Operation Restore Hope as a humanitarian aid. They needed people to bring humanitarian aid to the people facing famine in Somalia. That's what they needed. And so they did that, and it ended up horribly, and it ended up with a bunch of Somali people, civilians, dying at the hands of the U.S. Forces and NATO. It was NATO at the time, but also an organization that they had called the VTJF, Horn of Africa. So it was the Combined Joint Task Force Horn of Africa. And so that's been a little organization that they've had sowing disruption in the Horn of Africa for decades. And so they utilized that to bring in troops to bring humanitarian aid. But at the hands of these people, thousands of Somali people died. And so and they claim then that they're, fighting warlords. And then it's crazy. You see the same thing happen 20 years later with George Bush Jr., and he decides to go into Somalia again around 2002 to 2007, under the guise of an operation called Operation Endure Freedom. And so it's funny, these two links, 20-some years, 10 to 15 years apart, by George Bush Sr. and George Bush, designed to destabilize Somalia, to extract resources, because it was always about oil. Conoco had interest in Somalia. The gas company Conoco had interest in Somalia back in the 1990s, and they had controlling interest in the oil, and who profited from the oil, Conoco, and that's back in the early 90s. Now, it's the reinvasion of Somalia that we've recently seen in late May is because of another oil dispute that has been going back since maybe early this year. And early February, another gas and oil company, Coastline Exploration, signed a deal with Somalia, supposedly extract the oil in an extremely predatory way. And when Somalia decided that it wasn't legal for them to do that, the president was overthrown, and now we see in late May, Joe Biden announced the reintroduction of 500 troops into Somalia after they had been withdrawn by Trump. We're not praising Trump, because under Trump, he increased the droning of Somalia, even from what Obama was doing. In 2016, when Trump got in office, there was 15 airstrikes. In 17, there was 35. In 2018, there was 47. In 2019, it was a record. They bombed Somalia 60 times, killing 1,000 people. And so they claim that most of them were enemy combatants, but we understand that they've admitted to killing civilians since the early days of the occupation, early in 2007, 2002, the early 2000s, up until now. They've admitted to killing civilians and regular people. And so we understand that when they talk about killing members of Al-Shabaab, a supposed terrorist group in Somalia, we understand that some of them might be Al-Shabaab and they might be terrorists, but we understand that also the U.S. that's not their main interest. Their main interest is destabilizing the Horn of Africa, this time with Somalia.
And keep in mind, immediately after the recent election of Somalia's president, the recent election of Somalia's newest president, literally the day after he was elected, there was 500 troops being deployed to Somalia without even him knowing about it. he had to tweet out that this, like, we accept this, like, that's a good thing, because and another thing is that the elections within Somalia are not democratic. I mean, democracy goes beyond elections, we know that, but even in Somalia, there's not even democratic elections. They're elections by representatives of various tribes, various clans. I'm sorry, various clans, and it's like, the U.S. imperialism, it takes advantage of whatever social divisions are within that. There's massive amounts of corruption within that structure, and part of the reason why it's in the U.S. interest to stay as an occupying force is because they can have a permanent counterinsurgency kind of operation, and then they can train the various military structures of Somalia to have those same interests. So it's like an ideological, war in that sense, because they are transitioning what would be the interests of Somalia's people. They're transitioning, away from that to what serves U.S. interests. So I bring that up.
Exactly, because they've gotten Somalian troops. They've gotten Somali troops to the 80s, I believe, to attack Ethiopia. They've gotten Ethiopian troops to attack parts of Somalia, and so whatever part of Africa that these imperialists gain control of, or that they have neo-colonial puppets in place to serve the interests of the U.S., they're able to utilize these forces to attack other African people, and so they use them as a buffer. between the masses of African people, the regular people, the workers, the people who want revolutionary change. They use these neo-colonial puppets and the military as ground agents for imperialism, as African face ground agents for imperialism, so that to act as a buffer, as a zone of as a zone of destruction in between us and the imperialists and the ruling class. And they understand that, and they do that for a specific purpose and stuff like that. And we know that it's better, it serves them having neo-colonial puppets specifically to serve the Western nations and not their own people in these countries.
We see, we see that everywhere. My bad, but
no, you're good. No, you're good. We do see that everywhere because they do that literally everywhere, and that's their whole plan. That's their whole motto, and they repackage it and maybe are able to do it in slightly different ways around the globe. But we understand when they do it that they come in and that they destabilize a country. They've been destabilizing Africa for hundreds of years. So when the people decide to act, create change like we did in the 60s, and we have our own revolutionary governments, oh, well, then those get torn down. You can't serve your own people. You have to serve us. You have to feed us. We're the parasites. You have to feed the parasite. And so that's what we've been doing. And they need these neo-colonial agents. They need these puppet presidents to be in place, feeding them as the leech. We need to keep allowing extraction. We need to keep allowing privatization. We need to not have free education for our people. We need to not have free healthcare for our people.
It's like, how does this come into existence? Like the neo-colonial puppets, well, they take advantage of history of like cultural traditions within African society. They Africans, not to any of our fault, but just they see Africans, they see African culture, they see symbols that represent African people, the masses of African people. But if you do not have a class analysis, if you don't have an analysis of imperialism, of like the economic reality of the situation, then you can be fooled. You can be fooled by anyone that just shows up in a position of leadership that happens to have African cultural ties, So that class analysis of like, that is like, key to educating ourselves, to educating others, to organizing against, forms of production that do not benefit, the people that, produce the labor.
I'll add to that, Zach, is that the truth is the wealthiest country in the world because it stole free labor. It exploited and exploits African resources. The transatlantic slave trade, the development of the capitalist system. This is irrefutable. The insurance industries only came to fruition from money provided by African slave labor. But most Africans, especially, don't know this. People overall within the U.S. are to these historical facts. So most of us believe with the U.S. means being on the winning side. And everyone wants to. So many Africans, mainly well-intentioned, but informed, buy into the propaganda that we have a state in the U.S. So, for example, the belief that we built the U.S. code language for we created this wealth and we are in the reality of how the wealth was gained as was just escapes or isn't a priority to many of these Africans who have class decisions to side with the enemies of African hopes. Doing so will bring them personal financial success. This is important that because there are pretty petty bourgeois everywhere who adopt this mentality. And there are even some misdirected Africans who, because of their own dishonest class objectives, choose to out of the U.S. as Africans who somehow betrayed Africans. This analysis reaped in opportunism and disunity. There are plenty of Africans in the U.S. who sell us out daily. There have always been house Negroes and field Negroes. This class struggle among African people, regardless of where we are born. So that's echoing your point, Zach, about the class understanding and the class system.
Yep, most definitely. And so, yeah, the class analysis is important because that's where the neo-colonialism comes in and where it's so dangerous. Because, you know, we always care about representation and stuff like that. We know we like seeing African people in positions of power. It makes us feel good and stuff like that. We feel like it's one of us up there and stuff like that. Oh, that could be my cousin. That could be me. And it feels good until you realize that they're not actually beholden to you. They're not accountable to the masses of African people. They don't actually do anything to benefit the masses of African people. And they stand in the way of true liberation, of true self-determination for our people and true self-governance. Because right now, we have a person of African descent, of African face. We have a person with African characteristics and stuff like that, governing these nations in Africa, but they are beholden to the U.S. and to European imperialism and stuff like that. And so we're not the ones actually governing ourselves. We're not the ones deciding where our resources are going and what they're supposed to benefit. We're not the ones deciding that. It's the Western nations that are deciding it, and they're deciding to benefit themselves, the richest part of these places, the ruling class. It's benefiting them. It will definitely trickle down a little bit, and I don't want to. Obviously, we're not talking about. It'll come down a little bit. We benefit a little bit in the United Snakes and in the metropoles and in the belly of the beast and stuff like that. We benefit a little bit by way of technology and prices and stuff like that. But ultimately, they're exploiting all of us. When we're a part of this entire global movement that is inextricably linked. And so part of when we talk about Somalia and the U.S. invasion of Somalia is that the 1033 program that BAP highlights on their website, the Black Alliance for Peace, they do a great job in highlighting how the 1033 program relates to people in the United Snakes, especially African people, but poor people in general. But obviously, the masses of African people in the U.S. are majority poor, or most of us are poor. And so, so the 1033 program, it's the militarization of our police here, and it's the same weapons. The police here get the same weapons as the military and Africom gets to suppress our people in Somalia and in the Horn of Africa and are all around the continent. They use the same weapons. They're getting the same tanks, the same gear to protect themselves. They're getting the same armor and everything. And so the 1033 program is something that BAP, the Black Alliance for Peace, and a lot of activists over here are fighting against heavily, because we understand that the militarization of Africa coincides with the militarization of the police in the United States. And I just want to, I wish we could continue to talk about Somalia and obviously Libya as well. But, Somalia and the Horn of Africa is extremely important to us. And we have a lot of we have a big presence of people from the Horn of Africa in the United States, but especially where I'm at in Denver, Colorado, or Occupy Ute territory. We have a lot of Somali people here. We have a lot of Eritrean folks here, a lot of Ethiopian people here, and the masses of African people, we're too united and we're too bonded over things that connect us than things that are supposedly supposed to divide us, and that the enemy likes to use to divide us. And so, I just want to say that the U.S. invasion of Somalia is directly related to the military occupation of the entire continent of Africa, the recolonization of Africa, the extraction of its resources to benefit U.S. and European imperialism, and the overall arms trade and stuff like that. And so, so the U.S. out of Africa network, we want to talk about. Zach, if you want to talk about the U.S. out of Africa network and BAP and how they're getting along with that and stuff like that.
That was something I did not have a clear reading on. Actually, I do want to say that before we go into that whatever militarization is exported, it's imported right back to anywhere where Africans are. That's the entire world. So
exactly, and BAP has they have a program going on called the U.S. Out of Africa Network, and it's a coalition of activists and stuff like that, and different organizations that are coming together to fight for the demilitarization of Africa, and the exodus and the abolishment of Africom and stuff like that. And so, if anyone wants to get involved, you can go to BAP's website, theblackallianceforpeace.org. And they have a whole section on the U.S. Out of Africa Network, and you can join and get the newsletters. They have an Africom bulletin. BAP does a lot of good work on Africom and the militarization of the continent and the recolonization of it. And so, And so so that will conclude the talk about Africom, unfortunately. But we wanted to get into some COVID updates before we transition into an ending. We want to get into some COVID updates and maybe some little updates just in general about the state of the U.S. and things that are going on in the country. And so, I know that COVID is rising right now. The amount of cases have been rising actually in the past month. It's like we're in like another spike. The CDC is reporting another spike that is apparently bigger than the one in March. And so, if anyone wants to talk about that, Zach or Afro Phoenix.
I would just point out that COVID is the pandemic has never stopped being a pandemic, and that is because we do not have masking policies, or businesses are no longer required of distancing, of limiting customers, but also there's an extreme amount of scientific ignorance of COVID. People do not realize the severity of it. Just because you get COVID and you do not end up hospitalized does not diminish how severe COVID can be. There's studies now coming out on long COVID where you're dealing with chronic fatigue, memory issues. And what happens is the longer we do not have scientific social policies to address the issue, the more the COVID strain mutates. And as it mutates, of course, it becomes stronger, it becomes better at being spread. That's with the current BA, I think it's BA.5 strain. It is incredibly infectious, and previous vaccines, I believe previous vaccines are not a full, do not fully cover, prevent the transmission of BA.5. The best thing that you can do, as always, is masking, distancing, any social environment you're in, to try to produce an environment where everyone is masking. Bring your N95s. Those can be like really cheaply bought for like $1 each. So if you see a friend without a mask, you should be offering them a mask. If they refuse, you should. That's a moment of some education. Try those things.
Yeah, and KD's talking about in the chat that some municipalities aren't even reporting their numbers, and we know that they've been doing that for a minute because they have to hide the numbers. Oh, go ahead, Zach.
I was just gonna say they're also, even if they do report the numbers, they're based on they're often based on just like hospitalizations, because there's different, because there's like it's called like the community transmission. I forget. There's two different like transmission like tracking policies that I have, and one is just based on the number of hospitalizations. The other is how it's actually transmitting within your local county. Those, so whatever you see reported is very likely underreported, whether that's CDC inadequacy in tracking, or people not getting tested, because we do test like sewer water, but there's that's not like a bulletproof. Some people just are not, the symptoms are not being you know caught. So
And some places aren't even disclosing their wastewater data. KD said that, I think KD's out of New York too. So he's saying that New York hasn't disclosed its wastewater data since like February. And so we know that, like you're saying, that's not bulletproof, because also they're not trying to report that either, because they understand that we're at 1 million plus deaths right now. And when you start to, I don't know, when you start to highlight that, I think, people start to, rightfully so, understand the severity of what we're facing, and how the government literally just doesn't care about people dying. You know what I mean? They need us to work and stuff like that, but they don't need us to work that bad. They'll put us to work and we can die in the process. They've been killing us in the process for years. They don't really care how it's done necessarily. They just know that, get back to work. And if you die in the process, you die in the process, bro. Well,
this, and also you're 100% spot on, and this is exactly like, I remember Oniasawa was talking to me before, where she was saying that there was like a failure to address these COVID policies as a political moment. And it is because what could you do with unionization, for example? You could force your workplace's hand to implement better policies for managing that, so that like you know that's not just because, like, when I see unionization, there's always a narrow focus on just wage increase, and that's important, but you should also do other things, like focus on the health of your coworkers.
no, exactly. Exactly. And it's crazy because, like I'm saying, like, 1 million of folks residing in the US have died from COVID. China got 1.4 billion people, and Big Till posted in the chat. I didn't know how many people, I couldn't remember, but China has only lost 200,000 people total, or around 200,000 people total to COVID in 2 years. They got 1.4 billion people. I just want to, like, put that in perspective. We got 300 million people here, and 1 million of folks have died. They got 200,000 deaths. And so that, people talk about China and how that at what cost bullshit that we get from our US media. Yeah, China saved, they've protected lives for 2 years straight, the best they can, in 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 conditions that are supposedly harsh. At what cost? You know what I mean? They've lost 200,000 people to our 1 million, but at what cost? It's just ridiculous how, what we see from our nation, to try and get us to go along with the bullshit, and us, the like the complete lack
Mhm.
of care of, in the complete lack of care of loss of life from our nation and our government. They don't care. And so,
And to me, like, people like to criticize China, though, and even so-called leftists will criticize China as not being a socialist country, or not a country in socialist transition. But you look at the differences in how they address COVID, and to me, that is like, it fully lays out. Yeah, there are likely massive differences in their economy, because why are workers forcing, or why is the ruling class forcing workers to go back to work even before they've recovered from COVID? Because profits are at risk. They want those massive profits. They want you to work, and if you are struggling with COVID and you're sick, you're replaceable. There's no social safety net for you. That's why they are limiting unemployment benefits, all of that. When you go to China, you don't see that. You see that China, yeah, China's economy does hurt from, not having as many people being able to go out and engage in the markets and all that, because China still does have a market, but they're able to manage that better because there are national, China has its own control over large portions of its industries, so it's able to regulate it in a way that isn't like incredibly damaging. Where you see in the U.S., our industry, our economy is very it's fragile. It's in a constant state of crises. That's capitalism.
Yep, straight up. You want to say anything, Afro Phoenix?
I just want to remind us to people know that we are and if you could give the information for so to join us. So that's
Oh
what
yeah.
I wanted to add. Yeah.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Yeah. So yeah, as we transition to an end, we want to say, obviously, um, to everybody that we should all join a organization fighting for justice. I like to say join an organization fighting for liberation because
Yeah, with
but
that.
at the very least, join an organization fighting for justice and stuff like that, because we need more people in the fight against imperialism. We need um, more voices. We need more stability. We need more creativity. We need more minds to put to the task of fighting the beast and to freeing Africa, freeing our people on the continent, freeing our people in the diaspora all over where we're at, and to being part of the global movement for revolutionary change and against capitalism and for a socialist world where the workers and the masses of the people benefit from the wealth we create and from the resources on the places in which we live. And so, yeah. Anybody else?
I want to say join an organization fighting for liberation. Absolutely. Because revolution does not happen from like some minority privileged class. No, it happens from everyday people like you and me, where we're struggling. We're trying to implement things, build projects, do all that. Like, yeah, revolution is a process that working class people, everyday people engage with. So if you're not part of an organization, you should join one. Even if you don't think you have skills or whatever, doesn't matter. Get in one, you'll find your place. Like, that's AAPRP, Black Alliance for Peace. That's all that. If revolution isn't happening, it's because you're not in it. So join it.
Yes, 100%, 100%. And lastly, I just want to say, to the we got to talk about Libya and Somalia, and it always kind of, when we get to talk about topics, I wish, like, even when I watch videos, I'm like, dude, I wish we could talk about stuff like this for hours and stuff like that. I wish they could give a lecture about this for hours and stuff like that, because you can obviously keep going. And so I don't ever want to, like, put the position, place Libya and the destruction of Libya and what it means to Libyan people, to African people in general, into, like, a 30-minute box. And I'm sorry that we have to cut things short because I had technical difficulties in the beginning. I'm trash, but now we know that. That Google Chrome works and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't want to put Libya or Somalia into like 30-minute clips and stuff like that. But and so those struggles that are going on there are extremely important to us, and we must, like, do our part in the United States and wherever we're at to combat U.S. militarism, to combat Africom. We want to abolish Africom in totality. We want that shit gone. We want all neo-colonial agents gone from the continent, and we want to govern ourselves for Africans, and we want to have our resources benefit the people. We want socialism, and we want it now. And so that's what we're fighting for. So thank you to everybody for joining, and we'll see you guys soon. Peace out.